Ah, you're back. Good. I went ahead and made some more hot chocolate as an apology for last time. I've also got cookies to go with it. Go ahead, get comfortable, have some. There's plenty for everyone. So, today's story, while much of what lay within its context has since been proven to be inaccurate, its meaning is still important. History. It's a nebulous thing, all in all, and so it is important that the parts we remember are the parts that carry the greatest weight, the parts that will teach us how best to move forward as we write the history of our generation so that those who come after us can remember the important parts, the parts that will let them make the right decisions as they move forward with their own. It's important that we remember the important parts and not the superficial details. Sit back, relax, and let's dive right in. The Greatest Calling of History, otherwise known as A Hearthswarming Conspiracy, by Lady Grey. The fire cracked softly in the grate, giving Celestia's chambers a warm glow on that bitter midwinter's night. It was the week after Hearthswarming, and the city had slipped down from the fever of celebration into the subdued quiet of winter. Celestia herself had looked forward to the diplomatic low season, where there would be no interruptions, and she might finally catch up on her pile of books. No one wanted to travel through the heavy snow, after all. Well, almost no one. An audience. Celestia laid down The Return of Fourlock Hooves on the side table as the guard nodded. Good gracious, at this hour? It is Twilight Sparkle, Your Majesty. Celestia was taken aback. Twilight Sparkle? Here? Now? Yes, ma'am, the White Stallion said, not so subtly working to keep his face neutral. She says it's a matter of national importance. Celestia, under no such restrictions of professionalism, smiled broadly on the edge of a laugh. Oh, well, send her in then. With a quick salute, the guard turned to the door to her chambers and opened it broadly to reveal the little unicorn herself, carrying a book much too large for any filly. She was trailed by young Shining Armor, no doubt acting as the chaperone for this particular visit. Celestia could see the apology hanging on his tongue, but held up a hoof to forestall him. Twilight Sparkle, Celestia's personal protege for all of 1 year, strode into the room with her head held high. Princess Celestia, she said, I have learned a secret that may shake the very foundations of Equestria. Shining Armor stepped forward beside his sister. I'm so sorry, Princess. She simply wouldn't. Celestia waved him back and turned to her student. Why, Twilight, isn't it past your bedtime? She asked, offering a cushion with her wing. And in the middle of winter? You must be freezing. This can't wait, Your Highness. There's something terribly wrong, Twilight said, taking the offered seat by the fire. She pulled the book out of her bag, and Celestia caught a glimpse of the title, An Illustrated History of Equestria. Then Twilight flipped it open and began to rifle through the pages. Celestia met the eyes of the guard and nodded. He began to return to his post outside the door. Shining Armor seemed to strain at the invisible string that tied him to his sister. A bright lad with a knack for protection spells, she remembered. He'd make an excellent guard one day. Oh, a guardsman. Could you show Shining Armor around? We won't be long. The guard paused in the middle of shutting the door, then shrugged. Of course, Your Highness. Come on, kid. The bounce in Armor's trot made Celestia smile. Here, it's here. Twilight pulled her attention downward to the page titled simply, Starswirl the Bearded. It said in the Hearthswarming Eve play that Clover the Clever was the student of Starswirl the Bearded. But that's impossible because, look here. Starswirl the Bearded was born 523 years after Equestria was founded. There's no possible way that he could have taught Clover the Clever unless... Why are you laughing? This is serious, Princess. I think Starswirl the Bearded invented time travel. Celestia simply could not help herself. The little filly's face was just so serious. She'd seen the same expression on her royal advisor that morning. You have quite the imagination. I'm afraid, Twilight, that the truth is much less interesting than your story. She quietly calmed her laughter and felt her crown slip off down her shoulders and her teacher's hat slide into its place. Well, today's lesson would be history. You see, Clover the Clever was indeed a student of Starsora the Bearded, and she was really quite the character, she said, pointing to the illustration of a red-brown unicorn with a short mane and crooked smile wearing silver spectacles. But? Celestia turned to the very first chapter, skimming the pages until she found the one she wanted. It was Clover the Cunning who helped found Equestria. She pointed at a new illustration, this time of a tall green unicorn colored like the forest and wearing a tattered brown cloak. They are two totally different mares. Oh. Twilight furrowed her eyebrows, her cheeks gaining a flush. So, the one in the play is Clover the Cunning, yes. Then why do they call her Clover the Clever? Twilight mumbled, putting her tiny hoof down next to Celestia's. Somebody might get confused. Celestia put her wing on Twilight's shoulder. Every pony makes mistakes, Twilight. Besides, didn't you like the pageant? But you know that it's wrong, so why don't you fix it? Twilight asked, frowning up at her teacher. Well, Celestia thought about it. The Hearthswarming Eve pageant is a story, Twilight. It's not a history book. And in truth, there were many more things wrong with it than a simple name confusion. In retelling, the story had long ago slipped into the realm of myth. It's not hurting any pony. But think about all the little fillies who think Clover around wrong for the rest of their lives. It's a terrible play. Clover the Cunning would be appalled. Celestia put her hoof against her cheek. I think she would have enjoyed the play very much. How do you... Twilight stopped her huffing and gave the Aegis Alicorn a quizzical look. Then, after a pause, did you know her, Princess? Celestia chuckled softly. No, silly filly. Didn't you ever pay attention at the pageant? Not even I was at the founding of Equestria. She smiled. But Clover the Cunning was a famous magic historian. She wrote books thousands of years ago that we still have in our library today. We even have her own journals. Wow, Twilight said, looking into the air with her wide eyes. And ponies still read them? Of course. She was a very brilliant unicorn. Do you know what it says on the first page of her most famous book? Twilight tensed, looking around all over her, and then to the floor, and then down at her hooves before finally saying, No. Celestia sighed and smiled. That was not a test, Twilight. She wasn't unreasonable. The book in question was much too advanced for a filly, even one as gifted as Twilight, and the history much darker in the absence of pageantry. She would not even think of assigning it for another few years. Regardless, it says that the greatest calling of history is to remember the lessons of the past, that we may inherit the wisdom of our forebears, not their mistakes. Twilight looked up, confused. What does that mean? It means, Celestia said, that we study history to learn the lessons of the past, and we write history to teach ponies who haven't been born the lessons of our lifetime. And in so doing, we make sure that ponies don't keep making the same mistakes. Hearthswarming Eve is the day we remember the power harmony brings into our lives, and how much the pony tribes depend on each other. And the pageant reminds us that earth ponies and pegasi and unicorns and alicorns and alicorns, that we're all ponies, and we shouldn't dwell on our differences, Celestia said. And we have remembered that lesson for thousands of years. I think Clover the Cunning would be proud of that. Twilight was quiet for a long time. She stared down at the picture of Clover the Cunning, discovering the secret of the Wendigos is in an old cave so long ago.
Well, couldn't you just fix the play?
Twilight settled her chin down on the page.
It's just so sad that no pony will ever even remember her. But she is remembered. She's right here in a Philly's history book,
Celestia said.
And in other books, hundreds of them. Sometimes they call her Clover the Cunning, sometimes they call her something else. Many books don't even mention a name at all.
Do those count?
Being remembered isn't always about your name, Twilight. It's about your legacy. Clover the Cunning's legacy is a land full of ponies who care for each other. Even if every book lost every reference to her name, she would still be remembered at her best.
Celestia's eyes drifted to the window where a sliver of the moon shone through the clear air.
Because history is in our hearts, Twilight. If we honor her legacy, she will be remembered. I guess,
Twilight muttered.
But you know,
Celestia put a wing around her student and leaned in close.
Starswirl the Bearded did invent time travel.
Twilight lifted her head excitedly.
Really? Like, really? Truly. And the first thing he did with the spell was to go back in time and tell himself it was possible.
Twilight's grin soured.
Now you're just teasing me. No, honestly, that's exactly what happened.
The filly's face remained skeptical.
Did Clover the Cunning tell you that?
Celestia brushed Twilight with her wing.
Don't you mean Clover the Clever?
Yes, she said with a pout. And Celestia laughed.